What a big deal. We have friends here. I love her. Tommie D.
Wow. Gee. Where do you start after something like that, for heaven's sake? Yeah, I got to tell you something, though. John was going to introduce me. He passed me off to Mary Jane. Mary Jane says, well, why don't you ask Jack to introduce her? Thank you, Jack. This is an extremely humbling privilege. I can't believe you're all here. And I thank you for coming. We'd feel a little foolish being up here talking if you didn't come, but, you know. And John, thank you so much. You know, when I think about, I came from suicide to this kind of a privilege, I don't know what happened in between. It certainly has nothing to do with me. And I thank you for the privilege, John, of inviting us. We're not sure what we're going to do, but we're here at least. And I'm supposed to share a little bit about my story, what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. My prayer always is, dear Lord, please help me say whatever I'm going to say from my heart. Please help me make some contribution to this day. I am an alcoholic. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. My home group is the Mountain Group down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, though I give Cheshire, Connecticut credit for my first 13 years in the fellowship before I moved to Fort Lauderdale. And my name is Tommie D. Hi. We didn't even do that when I got sober. We didn't hold hands. We didn't read how it works, but we stayed sober once we made that commitment to not drink. I was the youngest of 3 daughters. My parents didn't smoke. They didn't drink. I often say I don't think they ever did anything that felt good. I don't know how I got here, but here I am. My dad had the same job. When Mary Jane started to get up, I thought she was going to come up and finish her story, but she sat back down again and said, get him up here. So anyhow, my dad had the same job for 46 years. My mother was a homebody, church organist for 35 years or so. And we were a very loving family, not by words, but by behavior. And no matter what I was involved with, my parents were always there. They supported me no matter what. We didn't talk at all about feelings. We talked about time and weather, about somebody else, especially if they weren't there. But nobody talked about what was going on inside of them. I had my first drink when I was a senior in high school. I didn't take that drink with the idea of becoming an alcoholic. In fact, I didn't want to be an alcoholic anything, whether it was mother or wife or daughter or sister. In fact, I thought of an alcoholic as a real bum. You know, the typical raincoat under the bridge male. I knew a couple of women in my town who were alcoholics, but we used to drink socially. And I didn't know that they were off home drinking alcoholically like I was when I went out before I went out. So I didn't know what really alcoholism was about. But you've taught me that. And I am so grateful to each and every one of you for sharing your stories with us that we might all be here tonight. I had that first drink when I was a senior in high school. 21 years and 9 months later, I was drinking out of a half-gallon bottle of gin. And what went on in between the first and the last drink, I think are essentially what went on in your lives. So that I really don't believe that bottoms are outside of us. I know early on in AA they were, but I truly believe that if they were outside, that we could create bottoms for people. I don't believe there are any twins here tonight. I haven't seen them, if you are. So that I don't think any of us look the same outside. Some of us are tall or short or old or young or male or female. But I truly believe that when we talk about feelings, we all identify. When I talk about lonely and loneliness, when I talk about fears, both the known and the unknown, I believe you know what I'm talking about. Resentment, what I call it, Siamese twin self-pity, because I can't have one without the other. Guilt, remorse. What makes me guilty may not make you guilty and vice versa, but we all know what guilt is. So I think if we talk about our insides, we can all identify with each other. And that's what I've learned within this fellowship. I used to compare me to other people and measured up to nobody. My first job, I played in an all girls band, and I saw what was happening to people, and I wasn't going to let it happen to me. And so I left the musical profession and went into the medical arts, and here I am. So in retrospect, and what I know today is totally in retrospect, I recognized none of it was happening. We lived in a neighborhood where everybody got together for cocktails at night. And back in 1957, we had a tragedy in our neighborhood, and we doubled our drinking. And 4 months later, the parents of that little girl said, "We're drinking too much." And they went back to their usual capacity. And I, in retrospect, realized I couldn't. So I believe that my really active alcoholism started back in maybe 51, 53, 57, somewhere around there. And that's not important to me today. I've always said I've had 2 deliberate drunks. Hundreds of drunks, but only 2 deliberate ones. One was when I was a senior in college, and 5 of us decided that we would get a pint and see what it was like to get drunk. 3 of them backed off. There are a bunch of alcoholics in this room, I can tell. And I vowed I'd never get drunk again. The other one, after we were married and had a family, my husband bought a hearse. It's funny now, but it wasn't funny then. It was pretty soon before I was to meet you folks. So you know the paranoia-like stage I was in. I don't know what I thought he was going to do with the body, but it was going to be, I don't know. He gave me this story that was very logical. We had 5 children, and he said we had a station wagon. And the hearse was 2 feet longer than the station wagon. And he said the children were 6, 8, 10, 12, and 14 at the time. And he said the 2 feet longer hearse will give them room to grow. That was logical. This was going to be our family car, our only car, by the way. And he said, and besides, when we go on a camping trip, if we can't find a place to park in a campground, we park along the side of the road. He said, you know, nobody's going to bother you in a hearse. I was telling this story one night, and I thought, what if we all started moving when somebody looked in? Well, the next day he drove this car to work. And his uncle, with whom he was in business, thought it was a little inappropriate for a doctor to be making house. What can I say? The hearse went the next day. You know, some of those stories, boy, weren't they tragic then? Did you tell the story about when she was going to get married and married Don? Did you tell him what happened when you went back to Baltimore? No, can I tell him? I don't want to tell her story, but it's funny. And I was hoping that maybe I didn't hear her when she said it, but she said, "It's 3 weeks. I hope I'll recognize him when I get out there." Yeah, I told her. It's funny. Oh, well, she'll get back at me. I remember some of the early times. My drinking was very normal compared to the people with whom I drank. And there came that time, in retrospect, that it was different. You know that denial, the rationalization like Mary Jane talked about? And I would compare me to other people. Well, I didn't drink as much as she did, or they did. I had this thing. I wanted attention, but when I got it, I didn't know what to do with it. I was active in music in high school and loved it, but didn't know what to do with the attention when I got it. I don't always know what to do with the attention today. I really don't. Because you told me when I got here that I had a physical allergy to alcohol, coupled with emotional immaturity and spiritual bankruptcy. I was 39 when I got here. I was about 10 emotionally. I was 89 in January. I think I may be about 19 now. Somebody said maybe 21, so I think I'll keep coming. I'll keep growing. I remember when my husband was in medical school. We were really broke. And we lived with another couple, and we had 42 cents between us. We had a can of hash in the house, and we went to the grocery store and bought 42 cents worth of green peppers and onions and sauteed those, and the guy said it was the best meal they'd had in a long time. But we had cocktails that night. Should have known. Weren't there signposts along the way that if we could but see it? But you told me that this is a disease of denial, and we just can't look. When I was back in the 40s, my sister was dying of cancer. I grew up in a church, Sunday school and church, was very active there. But my God was in the up there, or in the church. It was a religious God. And when my sister was dying of cancer, I remember saying to God, "It's okay, you can let her die now." And she didn't. And I got very angry at that God. Apparently, growing up, I had asked within my parents' means and always got what I wanted. And I couldn't understand. This is how emotionally immature I was. I couldn't understand why she didn't die. And it wasn't until I was sober in AA 15, 16 years later that I realized the only reason I wanted her to die was so I would stop hurting. I can add self-centered to my list of emotional immature characteristics. Wanting approval, low self-esteem, inadequacies. These, you told me, were all a third of my illness. I remember when we weren't real early in our marriage because we had 5 children. And I remember saying to my husband one night, I am so lonely. And he said, again, another logical statement, I don't know why you're so lonely. You have a lovely home, you have 5 children, you can do just about anything you want to do. I don't know why you're so lonely. You better believe I never told him again about a feeling, because I figured I was going to hear, grow up. You know, if you're crying, I'll give you something to cry about. You know, some of those things we start denying in ourselves. And I grew up believing that nice girls don't get angry and big girls don't cry, nice girls don't act out sexually. And my disease progressed so much that I acted out in any one or all 3 of those areas very inappropriately while I was under the influence of alcohol. Because I could tell alcohol that I was lonely, and alcohol said, have another drink, you'll be less lonely. And I did, and I was. So it is, again, in total retrospect, that every time I had a feeling that was inappropriate for me in my value system, and I don't know where that came from, I drank the drink away. I drank the feeling away. And that alcohol became such a discipliner for me. It was just incredible when I look back at it. I started going to psychiatrists, find out what was the matter with him that made me drink. Boy, that was real though, wasn't it? Yeah. And I defied this first of 7 to tell me that I was an alcoholic. And he said, well, let's take a look at your drinking, how much you're drinking. I said, 3 or 4 a day. Well, he thought I was talking about highballs. I was talking about pints. I just didn't mention the word, you know. He said, of course, you're not an alcoholic. Started going to the clergyman, find out what was the matter with God, wouldn't let me drink but keep me sober. And gosh, these things were so real. So real. My head, I really thought I had this all straightened out. And I went to the medical profession other than Charlie, because this was all his fault anyhow. And I wanted to have some horrible fatal illness. I didn't know I had one, but alcoholism, but I wanted one. Anything. When I think of that, and I remember it so well, I had to know that there was a little twist, something about drinking there. Something about drinking. I remember some of the totally insane behavior. I remember one night we're going to a party after community theater. And I remember stopping home first and getting how many slugs, I don't know, because I was afraid that when I got to the party, the alcohol would be all gone. That absolute paranoia that it would be gone. And I'm driving down, speeding down Main Street in Cheshire, Connecticut, saying if you were sober, you wouldn't be driving this fast, and I couldn't stop. When I think of some of this insane behavior, some of the driving I did with our children, I'll never forget the night I was to pick them up at our country club, and I couldn't find it. The fear of that was absolutely awful. And as drunk as I was, I couldn't stop and ask somebody for directions because they might think I was drinking. And then you go home and you have to drink more because you're so scared you're going to get found out. And you get to a point where it just doesn't do it anymore. I remember the times that I wanted so badly as my disease progressed that I wanted the children to come home from school and smell cookies baking in the house. I loved it when my mother did that when I was a kid. And my drinking, the alcoholism progressed to the point where I would have to drink in order to get the ingredients out. And then I'd have to have another drink, and you know how that goes. The drink takes the drink. And then I would come to, and I hadn't even made the cookies, and then I'd have to have a drink to cover up the guilt for not having made the cookies. And I know you know what I'm talking about. We wouldn't be here if we didn't all identify with those kinds of things. The behaviors may be different, but the feelings are the same. What makes me guilty may not make you guilty, and what makes you steal may not be why I steal, but we all do the same thing. The lying. Our friend Bob D from Las Vegas always says, we don't lie because we're liars. We lie because we're afraid. And then we have to drink to cover up the fear from lying. Because we're really pretty moral people in the long run. Back in 1960, I was in the Waterbury Hospital for malnutrition and dehydration. I had stopped eating. It was for about 6 months and lost 50 pounds. It was the food that made me sick. The old rationalization, it can't be the alcohol. And why? Because it had become a power greater than myself. And I was in the Waterbury Hospital for malnutrition, dehydration, and I had a spiritual experience that was the beginning of leading me to the God I have today. I was in a room with a lady who'd been injured in a horseback riding accident. Her horse was hit by a car, and the horse landed on top of her. And she was injured with fractured ribs and abrasions. I was discharged on a Saturday morning. She was to be discharged on that following Monday. And I got home that morning and felt real good when I got home. And that afternoon, I had such an incredible need to get back to that hospital. Charlie was on staff there. He said, why do you have to go back? I said, I don't know. What's the matter with you? I said, nothing. But I have to go back to that hospital. And it has to be the same bed. He took me back. I said, please call the hospital. Make sure that bed's available. I didn't know what I was talking about. And I got back, got into bed. And that night, the lady and I had a wonderful conversation, and I really felt that she was very ill, and there was something the matter with her, I guess is a better way to say it. And I didn't know what it was. And I called her nurse, and she said, oh, Mrs. Dayton, go back. She examined her, and she said, oh, Mrs. Dayton, go back to bed. She's fine. There's nothing the matter with her. And I couldn't do that. And I have been told, I called her doctor, and I called her husband, and they came in. And several hours later, her doctor said, Mrs. Dayton, you saved this woman's life. She'd been injured. She'd been internally bleeding with a ruptured spleen. And I went home, felt fine after that, and started to think there must be something to this man upstairs. I couldn't use the word God. It hurt my mouth. My cheeks kind of sunk in, you know. I was angry at God, really angry at God. My sister didn't die when I wanted her to. God, when I think of where we go from some of that childish thinking that we have to looking at it today for what it was then is just unbelievable to me. Unbelievable. And I stopped drinking for I don't know how long, 3 months, maybe 2 months, I don't know. Now, I can tell you my story from, before I got sober, I was one of these busy mothers in a small town. And I was a hot lunch worker and a motor car driver for the Red Cross and garden club member and women's club, all the things that mothers in small towns get involved with. And I realized today it was for approval. The title of something. And in the progression of my illness, I got to the drinking motor car driver. That was a good one. Especially when it got to be drunken motor car driver. I used to drive a lady who was blind to the grocery store to help her find vegetables. She always got to the can of beans before I did. I don't know how she found it. We were both blind. To the drunken Girl Scout leader, and I'm not proud of any of this, but that's where it takes us. I had the same flannel dirty shirt on, same filthy dungarees, hair was up in pin curls. Now, some of you don't know what pin curls were, but some of you might. Singing or whistling in the top of my lungs so people would think I was happy, happy, happy. And that's where my alcoholism took me. I did not know it was the first drink that got me drunk. I honestly thought it was the third or fourth drink. And we were having a dinner party one night. And if you've ever been in Cheshire, Connecticut, why, you've either been in the reformatory, kicked out of the academy, or drunk at Waverly Inn. Well, the academy was then for boys. The reformatory was for boys. And yeah, I've been drunk at Waverly Inn. That night, I thought, Tommy, you've been a good kid for 3 months or however long it was. You deserve a drink. You can have one drink. I didn't drink during the cocktail hour because I wasn't going to get to that third or fourth drink. As my dinner was served, I ordered one drink, a Manhattan. It was my favorite drink anyhow, but it was the strongest drink I could think of, too. And it did last. It was just one drink that got me drunk, and it lasted for another month or so. And in 2 months, I don't know. It included a stay at St. Francis Hospital up in Hartford, Connecticut, where they call them sleep therapy. It was shock treatments with anesthesia for 2 weeks. Came home, did the only thing I knew what to do with the resentment I had, because Charlie should have been up there. He deserved this, not me. Boy, was that real. And I drank, drove in a blackout with 2 of our children when they were very young. 35 miles from home, I came out of the blackout, had already bought a new tire, have no idea why. The only reason I know I did is because it was my handwriting in the car expense book. Asked my husband to please come get me. I had to look at street signs and find out what town I was in before I could even let him know where I was. These recollections of these experiences today scare me to death when I think of what could have happened. Back to St. Francis Hospital, back to 2 weeks of more of the sleep therapy. Came home the 4th of November, 1960. I lost faith in alcohol. I firmly believe that I can only live with one spirit at one time. And as long as the spirit of alcohol was helping me express my feelings very inappropriately, I believed in alcohol. The longer I drank, the lesser time it worked for me. On the 4th of November, 1960, it quit working for me. And you told me after I got to AA that that's exactly what would have happened, that it was like drinking water. I had built up an immunity to other chemicals and took an overdose of sleeping capsules that night because I chose to take my own life. The God of my understanding, whom I've come to know through you folks sharing your God with me, saw fit for me not to die. And when I came to the next morning, I heard me cry out loud, my God, I can't even kill myself. What do I do? What do I do? And that's when you folks came to me. I did not know until that moment that I was an alcoholic. I don't know if you remember when you were given that clarity. My God, I'm an alcoholic. That's what all this has been about, all these however many years it was. I was not intoxicated. I was not sick. I was emotionally paralyzed. I could not move. And a friend was there, and he said, Tommie, you have got to get yourself out of that bed. You're the only one who can do that. I don't know why I believed him, but I did. And I did get myself out of that bed, and I asked Charlie if he would please call a lady I knew was in the fellowship. That gal was sober when I needed her to be sober, and it wasn't many months later that she fell, fractured her skull, and bled to death, drinking. She and her hubby took me up to High Watch, which was then an AA-only oriented facility up in Kent, Connecticut. And I shall be eternally grateful. I'm not going to try and tell you what it means to me. I believe you know what it means to you where you were when you were introduced to AA, when you recognized that you were an alcoholic. And there was hope at last. And I went to High Watch and stayed for 10 days. We only had to be there for a week at that time. And the very next morning, I woke up. I didn't come to. I actually woke up for the first time in maybe 15 years without the aid of a pill or a drink. And I ate breakfast. I couldn't believe that. And I asked Wes, how come, Wes? And he said, Tommie, you made a decision. And once we make that decision, once we commit ourselves to not drinking, wonderful things begin to happen. Isn't it nice to have it wet on the outside, not on the inside? Wow, what a beautiful sound. That's great. The fourth day that I was there, there was a picture of a young man in prayer fashion, the picture of the young man up on the wall in prayer fashion, and a light went around his head, and there was a weight on my right shoulder that I truly believe was the physical hand of God as I understand him today. And it was the first time that I felt the Spirit of God. I went down to a special bridge, no longer there, and I prayed our Lord's Prayer out loud, and for the first time in my life said, Thy will be done, not my will be done. Haven't always been able to do that because I was so emotionally immature. Stayed there for the 10 days, And as I was getting ready to leave, Wes said, "And I want you to go home and find yourself a group." That was easy. There was one group in my town at the time. Find yourself a sponsor. That was easy. There was one female at the time. I said, "How many meetings should I go to?" He said, "One more than you need." You've had sponsors like that too, haven't you? Should I go every day? Did you drink every day, Tommie? You never answered questions for me. You always gave me another question. I was so afraid to make decisions because I was afraid of failure. And failure meant I was bad and I was wrong. I guess I thought parents were always perfect. I don't know. But that was my value system at the time. I've come to find out that mistakes are just part of my experience today. And I went home and I got very busy in AA. Gosh, I felt so good just not drinking. I didn't know there were two other parts of my illness. This was in November of 1960. Valentine's Day of 1961, I had 2 drinks. Charlie didn't send me a Valentine. And besides, he gave me cookie sheets, and I didn't think that was very romantic, so I drank at him. And you talk about the progression of this illness. When I say the progression is inside, nothing happened outside. I was never arrested, should have been, never in jail, should have been. It went on and on. But inside, you bet. And this is where I believe we can all identify. And I went up to my sponsor's house, and the guilt and the remorse was unbelievable. Unbelievable. And I said to her that day, it was a Tuesday, and I said, "How in the world am I going to have the right change for the paper boy on Saturday? How do you count," and God, this was so real, "how do you count 5 quarters for 5 children for Sunday school next Sunday?" This is February. "How do you cook turkey next Thanksgiving? How do you Christmas shop without a drink? And how am I going to celebrate my first anniversary, February 14th, 1962, without a drink?" God, that was real. And she died many years ago, but I could still hear her pounding her fist on her kitchen table. She said, "For God's sakes, Tommie, it's only Tuesday. Would you please use it up first?" Now, I don't know about you. I was good at living a day at a time. It was never the right day. So, I started thinking about what you were saying. Get the program inside of you, Tommie, where your alcoholism is. Where your alcoholism is. And I really know what you're talking about. I thought it was because I was a blamer. It was his fault. It was their fault. I'll never forget the time I had a dental appointment and I was late. I feel like such a fool. I went in and I was late for the dentist, and I said the traffic light went red in front of me. I wish I could have swallowed that back. But I thought, "Hey, Ninny, why don't you leave earlier?" And that's been one of the greatest lessons of my sober life. Why don't you leave earlier, Tommie? Instead of blaming something outside. But I was so emotionally immature. I wanted it to be Christmas every day. I wanted everybody to be happy every day. I wanted my husband home all the time. I didn't want my children arguing. I wanted it to be utopia. And that's not what life is all about. It's not what life is all about. 5 days after that last drunk, we were at a dinner meeting in New York. And I don't know what somebody said or who said it, but somebody said something. And don't you love this something happened? Something happened that night. And I felt, Tommie, if you ever drink again, you have nobody to blame but yourself. And that was when I really made the commitment, I will not drink no matter what. And if any of you are sitting here tonight wondering, should I or shouldn't I? Within these rooms of AA members, it's a pretty safe place to make a commitment. And I would ask you to ask yourself, can I make that commitment tonight? Because we can guarantee you, though nobody speaks for AA, that no decision to not drink is a decision to drink. That's a pretty powerful statement, and it's true. Started getting very active in AA. Did we start this meeting at 8:15? Is that when I'm supposed to get? I'm sorry? I gotta say, I'm gonna be fresh. Where were you when I was drinking? And I gotta tell you, I said that to him this afternoon, and he wasn't even born yet. So, bless your heart, John. Amazing, absolutely amazing. And I started ever so slowly on these steps, ever so slowly. My life wasn't unmanageable, and I'm not going to go through the steps. We may do something with them in the morning, I don't know. But I began to see where these steps were very progressive. They tell a story. And at the end of that 12th step is so that we will have having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. And so I have a whole new attitude toward the God of my understanding. When I first came to you, you told me I had a disease of the attitudes. Not me. And I didn't know what you're talking about until one day somebody said, today I'm not behind in my ironing, I'm just ahead in my washing. And I began to get the idea that it was my attitude. Very immature attitude, I might add. And so I started the journey of the steps inside of me. And then I got active, like Mary Jane, in service. And I wouldn't trade places with anybody today for the gifts that I've been given. You know how I got to be GSR? My first sponsor said, Tommie, you go to a lot of meetings, you be GSR. That's how I got to be GSR. And back in 1964, for the conference, panel 15, 65, 66, I was given the privilege of delegate from Connecticut. And I shall be eternally grateful, because it was there that I began to learn how inadequate I was, how emotionally immature I was. And I have never been in any privilege in AA that I haven't learned something about me. It's just like when we come to AA because we don't know how to stay sober. And we learn how to stay sober. And then we get involved with service. And I found out all about me and how I wanted to be in control. And I knew better than you. And it was all about my false ego, my need to be important. Gosh, it was awful. And you know, I really think it was all based on my past behavior that was so inappropriate. I don't know. I think I'm so smart sometimes today, but that's what I think. And so I had that privilege of being delegate, and back in 64, 5. We had Ebby Thatcher. Now, Ebby was Bill's sponsor, and Bill wanted you to know that. He also wanted you to know that Ebby died with 2.5 years of recovery. And a lot of people don't know that, and a lot of people pass the message on that Ebby died drunk, and Ebby did not die drunk. He died sober. And that was in 1966. And he died in Albany. And we went from the East Coast to Albany for Ebby's funeral. And on the way to Ebby's funeral, when you're in the car with your sponsor, things happen. You've had the experience. And my 5th step poured out of me. And when we were at Ebby's funeral, and by the way, there were but 12 of us at Ebby's funeral, and we thought something very special was going on. 12 steps, 12 traditions, 12 concepts, 12 people at Ebby's funeral. And I was standing with Bill with Ebby's casket with our arms around each other, and I said, you know, Bill, who is to say that if Ebby had been able to stay sober that you would have? Because it was in Bill 12-stepping Ebby that Bill stayed sober. And he said, Tommie, I've thought of that so often. On the way home, the 3rd step took me. And it was the God of my understanding saying to me, Tommie, when you wake up in the morning, the day is already born. Your only responsibility is to see where you fit into the day. Now, I don't know about you, but I used to come to and start manipulating the day to make me feel better. That's not my job. My job is to see where I fit into the day. Accept life exactly where it is. I tried to thank Ebby for what he had done for Bill, who passed it on to Bob, who's through all the fingers of AA, we're here tonight. Ebby was a gruff man. He was an angry man. And in his gruff voice, he said, don't thank me, pass it on. And like Mary Jane was saying, you can't give it away. It just keeps coming right back at you. Hundreds fold. When I was first sober, some of the ladies who would give me the privilege of sponsoring them weren't staying sober. And I went belly aching to Bill one day. And, you know, it's like, didn't they know who they asked? The great Messiah arrived when I got here. Because I really knew if they would just do what I told them to do, that they would be just fine. So I went to Bill and asked him about this. And he said, Tommie, do you think I 12-stepped Dr. Bob so he wouldn't drink? And I said, yeah, Bill. Didn't you really believe that? I sure did. And he said, oh, no. I 12-stepped Dr. Bob so I wouldn't drink. Wow. That quieted me down in a hurry. And he said it nicely, but I paraphrase it. He said, when you think you're so smart, you know what somebody else needs to hear. That's only because your own head needs to hear it. So pay attention to what you're saying. I used to think you could hear what I was saying, what I was thinking, but I couldn't hear what I was thinking. So I have to say it out loud to see where I'm at. So I thank you all for coming, because I may find out tonight, hear it from Mary Jane, do you know what you said? But seriously, is such an important thing for me, because I have been speaking at meetings, and all of a sudden I'll say, that's not true. I just told a lie. But it seemed real while I was saying it. We learn so much about ourselves by having other people willing to listen. That's an awesome formula when I think about it. Absolutely. I got so many stories. Jack kind of told one, but I think I'll tell that one. Not right now. He said I could talk till midnight. 1965, we were in Toronto, and was that when you met Don? No. Oh, that was 68. Okay. And that was when the I Am Responsible Declaration was dedicated. And when you were delegate, before the flag ceremony, some of you have been to the internationals, I'm sure, and been tremendously impressed with the flag ceremonies. Well, before we had the flag ceremonies, the current delegates would be participation in one of the ceremonies on stage, and in '66, it was the I Am Responsible Declaration. And we were behind stage that night, and while Bill and all the Board of Trustee members were on stage, and when they were all finished, we burst through this huge, big parchment world and lined up across the front of the stage, each reciting that declaration in our own native tongue. You know, you see so much cooperation and people helping people in AA, and we had one delegate from Vancouver and another delegate from Texas, and Jerry in Texas was in a wheelchair, and he needed somebody to push his wheelchair. Jan from Vancouver walked with 2 canes, so just before we went out on stage, she dropped her canes and used his wheelchair, the 2 handles, as her canes. And that was a very moving thing. Al Steckman, who was the 3rd editor of the Grapevine and one of the first 100 AA members of AA, was asked to write some little ditty that would express something for Toronto Convention. And he wrote the I Am Responsible Declaration. And he told us afterward, and I have an article that he wrote for the Today, which is the Palm Beach County newsletter, that the reason he wrote that I Am Responsible Declaration was so that we would look at our financial responsibility to AA. Because if we are not financially responsible for our part in AA will fall apart. How often, I don't know about you folks, but when I came in, people were putting $1 in the basket, and they're today still putting $1 in the basket. Might drink 2 or 3 cups of coffee, but a cup of coffee, it costs more than $1. And if I am financially responsible, I certainly am at least going to pay for my coffee. So I just pass that on to you for you to think about yourselves, because I don't know any of you, so I just wanted to share with you why that declaration was written. He also wanted AA to be available. My daughter died back in 2004 with 12 years of sobriety. It was here for her. My grandson has been to a couple of meetings with me. My son doesn't go to AA, but he has 35 years without a drink. He knows all about AA. My children had the privilege of going to Bill and Lois's home and meeting with them, so they know about it. I don't know about you, but I sure want it to be here for the rest of my life and for whoever else is coming after here. I will tell that story, but because we'll have enough time tomorrow. There'll be questions too, but oh golly. It's so hard to tell you which story to talk about because I've The privileges are beyond my wildest, absolutely. But Lois had invited us to lunch one day. And if any of you have been to Lois and Bill's home, if you haven't, when you walk in the living room door, the fireplace is to your left. In the wintertime, when this one day Bill had a wonderful big fire in the fireplace, and in the wintertime, Lois would set the living room so you could look into the fireplace. In the spring, in flowering time, she would face it out the front door so you could enjoy her garden. But this was February. We drove in the driveway, and Bill came running up the steps in his shirt sleeves. I said, "Bill Wilson, what are you doing running up these stairs in your shirt sleeves?" He said, "I quit smoking." He said, "I should have done it 9 years ago, but at least I quit." Well, he had this roaring fire in the fireplace, and then there was a coffee table, and then a couch looking into the fireplace. And over in your far right was the dining room table. And Lois was on one side, one end, and then my sponsor, Hazel, then myself. Bill was on this side, and a lady sitting across from me. And she was experiencing a very painful depression. So much so she could not sit at the dining room table, and she got up and went over and laid down on the couch looking into the fireplace so that we couldn't see her. Bill loved the crowds, there was no question about that. What was worse for him was knowing that there was a sick alcoholic there. And he loved the one-on-one with an uncomfortable, sick alcoholic more than the crowds. And I don't think a minute went by before Bill excused himself from the table and got up and went over and sat on that coffee table, facing us but looking down on her, 12-stepping her. From a suicide attempt to watching Bill Wilson 12-step a sick alcoholic to being here with you tonight is an amazing transition for me. I would like to close with a little prayer I pray very often, and I'll tell you about my family tomorrow probably. But may I say first that I believe the key to my sobriety is the two words, I believe, and people. And to me, people are like the seeds of a flower. They need the miracle of God and man to make them grow. And to me, that is AA, the miracle of God and man. Dear Lord, please help me to accept the kind of life you have chosen for me to live. Make me ever mindful of the needs of others and what you would have me do with my life, that thy will be done. Thank you very much, and I love you.
Let's close with the Lord's Prayer. You're all hooked up? Our Father,